The Shahnameh, also transliterated as Shahnama, is a long epic poem written by the Persian poet Ferdowsi between c. 977 and 1010 CE and is the national epic of Greater Iran, consisting of some 60,000 verses. The Shahnameh is the world's longest epic poetry written by a single poet. It tells mainly the mythical and to some extent the historical past of the Persian Empire from the creation of the world until the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century. Today Iran, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan and the greater region influenced by the Persian culture celebrate this national epic. The work is of central importance in Persian culture, regarded as a literary masterpiece, and definitive of the ethno-national cultural identity of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan and Tajikistan. It is also important to the contemporary adherents of Zoroastrianism, in that it traces the historical links between the beginnings of the religion with the death of the last Sassanid ruler of Persia during the Muslim conquest on an end to the Zoroastrian influence in Iran. Composition. Ferdowsi started writing the Shahnameh in 977 AD and completed it on 8 March 1010. The Shahnameh is a monument of poetry and historiography, being mainly the poetical recast of what Ferdowsi, his contemporaries, and his predecessors regarded as the account of Iran's ancient history. Many such accounts already existed in prose, an example being the Abu Manshuri Shahnameh, a small portion of Ferdowsi's work, in passages scattered throughout the Shahnameh, is entirely of his own conception. The Shahnameh is an epic poem of over 50,000 couplets, written in early modern Persian. It is based mainly on a prose work of the same name compiled in Ferdowsi's earlier life in his native Tus. This prose Shahnameh was in turn, and for the most part, the translation of a Pahlavi work known as the Zawaid-e-Namag, a late Sassanid compilation of the history of the kings and heroes of Persia from mythical times down to the reign of Khosrau II. The Zawaid-e-Namag contained historical information on the later Sassanid period, but it does not appear to have drawn on any historical sources for the earlier Sassanid period. Ferdowsi added material continuing the story to the overthrow of the Sassanids by the Arabs in the middle of the 7th century. The first to undertake the versification of the Pahlavi chronicle was Abu Mansur Daqiqi, a contemporary of Ferdowsi, poet at the court of the Samanids, who came to a violent end after completing only 1,000 verses. These verses, which deal with the rise of the prophet Zoroaster, were afterward incorporated by Ferdowsi, with acknowledgement in his own poem. The style of the Shahnameh shows characteristics of both written and oral literature. Some claim that Ferdowsi also used Zoroastrian nasks, such as the now lost Shaddad, as sources as well. Many other Pahlavi sources were used in composing the epic, prominent being the Shahnameh Pabagan, which was originally written during the late Sassanid era and gave accounts of how Ardashir I came to power, which, because of its historical proximity, is thought to be highly accurate. Besides, the text is written in the late Middle Persian, which was the immediate ancestor of modern Persian. Hence, a great portion of the historical chronicles given in Shahnameh are based on this epic, and there are in fact various phrases and words which can be matched between these two sources according to Zabuhullah Safa. According to one account of the sources, a Persian named Dekan in the court of King Anushirwan Dadgah had composed a voluminous book in prose form, known as Shahnameh. After the fall of the Iranian Empire, Shahnameh came into the possession of King Yaqubleh, and then the Samana king Nuh ordered the poet Daqiqi to complete it. But Daqiqi was killed by his slave, Ferdowsi obtained the book through a friend. Content: the Shahnameh provides a poetic account of the prehistory and history of Iran, beginning with the creation of the world and the introduction of the arts of civilization, and ending with the Islamic conquest of Persia. The work is not precisely chronological, but there is a general movement through time. Some of the characters live for hundreds of years, but most have normal lifespans. There are many shahs who come and go, as well as heroes and villains who also come and go. The only lasting images are those of Greater Persia itself, and of a succession of sunrises and sunsets, no two ever exactly alike, yet illustrative of the passage of time. The work is divided into three successive parts: the mythical, heroic, and historical ages. Father Time, a Saturn-like image, is a reminder of the tragedy of death and loss, yet the next sunrise comes bringing with it hope of a new day. In the first cycle of creation, evil is external. In the second cycle, we see the beginnings of family hatred, bad behavior, and evil permeating human nature. Shah Ferdowsi's two eldest sons feel greed and envy toward their innocent younger brother, and, thinking the father favors him, they murder him. The murdered prince's son avenges the murder, and all are immersed in the cycle of murder and revenge, blood and more blood. In the third cycle, we encounter a series of flawed shahs. There is a Phaedra-like story of Shah Kavis, his wife Sudabe, and her passion for and rejection by her stepson, Sayavash. It is only in the characterizations of the work's many figures, both male and female, that Zoroaster's original view of the human condition comes through. Zoroaster emphasized human free will. All of Ferdowsi's characters are complex. None is an archetype or a puppet. The best characters have flaws, and the worst have moments of humanity. Traditional historiography in Iran has claimed that Ferdowsi was grieved by the fall of the Sassanid Empire and its subsequent rule by Arabs and Turks. The Shahnameh, the argument goes, is largely his effort to preserve the memory of Persia's golden days and transmit it to a new generation so that they could learn and try to build a better world. Although most scholars have contended that Ferdowsi's main concern was the preservation of the pre-Islamic legacy of myth and history, a number of authors have formally challenged this view. The mythical age: this portion of the Shahnameh is relatively short, amounting to some 2,100 verses or 4% of the entire book, and it narrates events with the simplicity, predictability, and swiftness of a historical work. After an opening in praise of God and wisdom, the Shahnameh gives an account of the creation of the world and of man as believed by the Sasanians. This introduction is followed by the story of the first man, Ki-Umaz, who also became the first king after a period of mountain dwelling. His grandson Hushang, son of Shahnameh, accidentally discovered fire and established the Sadeh feast in its honor. Stories of Tamuras, Jamshid, Zarqawa, Ferdowsi, and his three sons Sam, Tur, and Iraj, and his grandson Manacher are related in this section. The heroic age: almost two-thirds of the Shahnameh is devoted to the age of heroes, extending from Manacher's reign until the conquest of Alexander the Great. The main feature of this period is the major role played by the Sakar-Sistani heroes, who appear as the backbone of the Persian Empire. Gashasp is briefly mentioned with his son Nariman, whose own son Sam acted as the leading paladin of Manacher while reigning in Sistan in his own right. His successors were his son Zal and Zal's son Rostam, the bravest of the brave, and then Faramaz. Among the stories described in this section of the romance of Zal and Rudabah, the 7 stages of Rostam and Sohrab, Sayavash and Sudaba, Rostam and Akvandiv, the romance of Bijan and Maniyat, the wars with Afrasiab, Daqiq's account of the story of Goshtasp and Arjasp, and Rostam and Esfandiar. The historical age. A brief mention of the Arsacid dynasty follows the history of Alexander and precedes that of Ardashir, the first founder of the Sassanid Empire. After this, Sassanid history is related with a good deal of accuracy. The fall of the Sassanids and the Arab conquest of Persia are narrated romantically. Message: Ferdowsi did not expect his readers to pass over historical events indifferently, but asked them to think carefully, to see the grounds for the rise and fall of individuals and nations, and to learn from the past in order to improve the present, and to better shape the future. Ferdowsi stresses his belief that since the world is transient, and since everyone is merely a passerby, one is wise to avoid cruelty, lying, avarice, and other evils. Instead, one should strive for justice, honor, truth, order, and other virtues. The singular message that the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi strives to convey is the idea that the history of the Sassanid Empire was a complete and immutable whole. It started with Qumars, the first man, and ended with his 50th son and successor, Yazdijad III. 6,000 years of history of Iran. The task of Ferdowsi was to prevent this history from being lost to future Persian generations. According to Jalal Khalagi Mudlak, the Shahnameh teaches a wide variety of moral virtues, like worship of one God, religious uprightness, patriotism, love of wife, family and children, and helping the poor. Influence on Persian language. After the Shahnameh, a number of other works similar in nature surfaced over the centuries within the cultural sphere of the Persian language. Without exception, all such works were based in style and method on the Shahnameh, but none of them could quite achieve the same degree of fame and popularity. Some experts believe the main reason the modern Persian language today is more or less the same language as that of Ferdowsi's time over 1,000 years ago is due to the very existence of works like the Shahnameh, which have had lasting and profound cultural and linguistic influence. In other words, the Shahnameh itself has become one of the main pillars of the modern Persian language. Studying Ferdowsi's masterpiece also became a requirement for achieving mastery of the Persian language by subsequent Persian poets, as evidenced by numerous references to the Shahnameh in the works. This is also due to the fact that Ferdowsi went to great lengths to avoid any words drawn from the Arabic language, words which had increasingly infiltrated the Persian language following the Arab conquest of Persia in the 7th century. Ferdowsi followed this path not only to preserve and purify the Persian language, but also as a stark political statement against the Arab conquest of Persia. This assertion has been called into question by Muhammad Moinfar, who has noted that there are numerous examples of Arabic words in the Shahnameh which are effectively synonyms for Persian words previously used in the text. This calls into question the idea of Ferdowsi's deliberate eschewing of Arabic words. The Shahnameh has 62 stories, 990 chapters, and some 60,000 rhyming couplets, making it more than 3 times the length of Homer's Iliad, and more than 12 times the length of the German Nibelungenlied. According to Ferdowsi, the final edition of the Shahnameh contained some 60,000 distiche, but this is a round figure. Most of the relatively reliable manuscripts have preserved a little over 50,000 distiche. Nizami-e-Arazi reports that the final edition of the Shahnameh sent to the court of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni was prepared in 7 volumes. Cultural influence. The Shirvanshah dynasty adopted many of the names from the Shahnameh. The relationship between Shirvanshah and his son, Manachi, is mentioned in Chapter 8 of Nizami's Lilio Majnun. Nizami advises the king's son to read the Shahnameh and to remember the meaningful sayings of the wise, according to the Turkish historian Mehmet Fuat Köprülü. Indeed, despite all claims to the contrary, there is no question that Persian influence was paramount among the Seljuks of Anatolia. This is clearly revealed by the fact that the sultans who ascended the throne after Ghiyath al-Din Khosrow I assumed titles taken from ancient Persian mythology, like Kai Khosrau Kavis, and Kai Kobid, and that Ala al-Din Gubadai had some passages from the Shahnameh inscribed on the walls of Konya and Shivas. When we take into consideration domestic life in the Konya courts and the sincerity of the favor and attachment of the rulers to Persian poets and Persian literature, then this fact is undeniable. Shah Ismail I was also deeply influenced by the Persian literary tradition of Iran, particularly by the Shahnameh, which probably explains the fact that he named all of his sons after Shahnameh characters. Dixon and Welch suggest that Ismail's Shahnameh Shahi was intended as a present to the young Tahmasp. After defeating Muhammad Shaybani's Uzbeks, Ismail asked Hatfi, a famous poet from Jam, to write a Shahnameh-like epic about his victories and his newly established dynasty. Although the epic was left unfinished, it was an example of Maithnawiz in the heroic style of the Shahnameh written later on for the Safavid kings. The Shahnameh's influence has extended beyond the Persian sphere. Professor Victoria Araklava of Yerevan University states, during the 10 centuries past after Ferdowsi composed his monumental work, heroic legends and stories of Shahnameh have remained the main source of the storytelling for the peoples of this region: Persians, Pashtuns, Kurds, Gurans, Talashiza, Armenians, Georgians, North Caucasian peoples, etc. On Georgian identity, Jamshid S.H. Janashvili remarks on the connection of Georgian culture with that of Shahnameh. The names of many Shahnameh heroes, such as Rostamai, Themina, Samai, or Zalai, are found in 11th and 12th century Georgian literature. They are indirect evidence for an old Georgian translation of the Shahnameh that is no longer extant. The Shahnameh was translated, not only to satisfy the literary and aesthetic needs of readers and listeners, but also to inspire the young with the spirit of heroism and Georgian patriotism. Georgian ideology, customs, and worldview often informed these translations because they were oriented toward Georgian poetic culture. Conversely, Georgians consider these translations works of the native literature. Georgian versions of the Shahnameh are quite popular, and the stories of Rostam and Sohrab, Orbezian and Manisa became part of Georgian folklore. On Turkic identity, despite some popular belief, the Turanians of Shahnameh have no relationship with the ethno-linguistic group Turk today. The Turanians of Shahnameh are an Iranian people representing Iranian nomads of the Eurasian steppes and have no relationship to the culture of Turks. Turan, a Persian for the areas of Central Asia beyond the Oxus up to the 7th century, was generally an Iranian-speaking land. According to Richard Fry, the extent of influence of the Iranian epic is shown by the Turks who accepted it as their own ancient history as well as that of Iran. The Turks were so much influenced by this cycle of stories that in the 11th century AD we find the Kara Khanid dynasty in Central Asia calling itself the family of Afrasiab, and so it is known in the Islamic history. Turks, as an ethno-linguistic group, have been influenced by the Shahnameh since advent of Seljuks. Tofril III of Seljuks is said to have recited the Shahnameh while swinging his mace in battle. According to Ibn Bibi, in 618 1221, the Seljuk of Rumayla al-Din Kubad decorated the walls of Konya and Shivas with verses from the Shahnameh. The Turks themselves connected their origin not with Turkish tribal history but with the Turan of Shahnameh. Specifically in India, through the Shahnameh, they felt themselves to be the last outpost tied to the civilized world by the thread of Iranianism. Legacy. Ferdowsi concludes the Shahnameh by writing, "I've reached the end of this great history and all the land will talk of me. I shall not die. These seeds I've sown will save my name and reputation from the grave, and men of sense and wisdom will proclaim, when I have gone, my praises and my fame." Another translation of Ferdowsi's poet by Reza Jamshidi Safa. Much I have suffered in these 30 years. I have revived the Ajam with my verse. I will not die then alive in the world, for I have spread the seed of the word. Whoever has sense, path and faith, after my death will send me praise. This prediction of Ferdowsi has come true, and many Persian literary figures, historians and biographers have praised him and the Shahnameh. The Shahnameh is considered by many to be the most important piece of work in Persian literature. Western writers have also praised the Shahnameh and Persian literature in general. Persian literature has been considered by such thinkers as Goethe as one of the four main bodies of world literature. Goethe was inspired by Persian literature, which moved him to write West-Eastern Divan. Goethe wrote, "When we turn our attention to a peaceful, civilized people, the Persians, we must, since it was actually the poetry that inspired this work, go back to the earliest period to be able to understand more recent times. It will always seem strange to the historians that no matter how many times a country has been conquered, subjugated and even destroyed by enemies, there is always a certain national core preserved in its character, and before you know it, there re-emerges a long familiar native phenomenon. In this sense, it would be pleasant to learn about the most ancient Persians and quickly follow them up to the present day at an all the more free and steady pace." Biographies. Argo's Shahnameh, a biography of important poets and writers, has long been a Persian tradition. Some of the biographies of Ferdowsi are now considered apocryphal. Nevertheless, this shows the important impact he had in the Persian world. Among the famous biographies are Shahnameh by Nezami, Arudi-I Samarkandi, Tazkirat al-Shuara by al-Shah-I Samarkandi, Bar-Aristan by Jami, Lubab al-Albab by Muhammad Orfi, Natij al-Afkar by Maulana Muhammad Qudrat Allah, Arafat al-Ashayin by Taqi al-Din Afadi Balyani. Poets. Famous poets of Persia and the Persian tradition have praised and eulogized Ferdowsi. Many of them were heavily influenced by his writing and used his genre and stories to develop their own Persian epics, stories and poems. And very remarked about the eloquence of the Shahnameh. He was not just a teacher and we his students. He was like a god and we are his slaves. Asadi Tusi was born in the same city as Ferdowsi. His Shahnameh was inspired by the Shahnameh, as he attests in the introduction. He praises Ferdowsi in the introduction and considers Ferdowsi the greatest poet of his time. Masoud Saad Salman showed the influence of the Shahnameh only 80 years after its composition by reciting its poems in the Ghaznavid court of India. Othman Mughtari, another poet at the Ghaznavid court of India, remarked, "Alive is Rustam through the epic of Ferdowsi, else there would not be a trace of him in this world." Sanai believed that the foundation of poetry was really established by Ferdowsi. Nizami Ganjavi was influenced greatly by Ferdowsi, and 3 of his 5 jewels had to do with pre-Islamic Persia. His Khosrow Shirin, Haft Paykar and Eskandar name used the Shahnameh as a major source. Nizami remarks that Ferdowsi is the wise sage of Tus who beautified and decorated words like a new bride. Kargani, the court poet of the Shirvanshah, wrote of Ferdowsi, "The candle of the wise in this darkness of sorrow." The pure words of Ferdowsi of the Tusi are such: his pure sense is an angelic birth. Angelic born is anyone who's like Ferdowsi. It wrote about the poetry of Ferdowsi, "Open eyes and through the sweet poetry see the heavenly Eden of Ferdowsi." In a famous poem, Sa'di wrote, "How sweetly has conveyed the pure-natured Ferdowsi, may blessing be upon his pure resting place. Do not harass the ant that's dragging a seed, because it has life and sweet life is dear." In the Bar Ariston, Jamie wrote, "He came from Tus and his excellence, renown and perfection are well known. Yes, what need is there of the panegyrics of others to that man who has composed verses as those of the Shahnameh?" Many other poets, e.g. Hafiz, Rumi and other mystical poets, have used imageries of Shahnameh heroes in the poetry. Persian historiography. The Shahnameh's impact on Persian historiography was immediate, and some historians decorated the books with the verses of Shahnameh. Below is sample of 10 important historians who have praised the Shahnameh and Ferdowsi, the unknown writer of the Tariq system written around 1053. The unknown writer of Majma' al-Tawariq wa al-Qasas, Muhammad Ali Ravandi, the writer of the Rahat al-Sadr wa At al-Su'ar, Ibn Bibi, the writer of the history book Al-Awamir al-Aliyah, written during the era of Ala ad-Din Kagobit, Ibn Esfandiar, the writer of the Tariq Tabaristan, Muhammad Juwayna, the early historian of the Mongol era in the Tariq Jahangoshe. Hamdullah Mustafi Kazwini also paid much attention to the Shahnameh and wrote the Zafarnama based on the same style in the Ilkhanid era. Hafizi Abru in the Majma' al-Tawariq. Quand Mir in the Habab al-Sayyid praised Ferdowsi and gave an extensive biography on Ferdowsi. The Arab historian Ibn Atir remarks in his book Al-Kamal that, if we named the Quran of Ajam, we have not said something in vain. If a poet writes poetry and the poems have many verses, or if someone writes many compositions, it will always be the case that some of the writings might not be excellent. But in the case of Shahnameh, despite having more than 40,000 couplets, all its verses are excellent.